Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of the Strategic Growth Podcast. I have a guest today, Kris Ward, who's a leading authority on leveraging your time and scaling your business, something everyone can use. Kris is the founder of Win the Hour, Win the Day. It's a philosophy, a book, and a podcast, all the good stuff. Welcome to the Strategic Growth Podcast, Kris.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, Kyle. I'm all about strategic growth. So I've been looking forward to this.
Welcome to the Golden Group Strategic Growth Podcast, featuring expert insights, interviews with thought leaders, and business plan triage. Hosted by Kyle Golding, award-winning entrepreneur, CEO, and chief strategic idealist for the Golden Group.
I'm all about having great systems in place in order to be as effective and as efficient as possible. And that's right up your alley. So give us a little bit of background, kind of how you came to win the hour, win the day, what it was doing in your professional life. And then we'll have some conversation about how people can apply it to their professional lives.
So I started as a marketing strategist, like almost 14 years ago. And the first couple of years I was in business, I worked insane hours, and it was about the 2-year mark that I was told that I was losing some of my charm because I hadn't slept in 2 years. As my husband said, you're always stealing from sleep, getting up earlier and earlier and staying later and later, right? And so I realized that the people that were supporting me most and cheering me on and doing all this stuff, like I started to become short with them. And I thought, this cannot be. So I literally went from working 16 hours a day down to 6. Now, this did not happen overnight. This is a whole story on its own. But as I move this story forward, luckily I did that because it was a couple of years after that my husband had been diagnosed with colon cancer, and I was pulled away from the business for about 2 years. And when I returned after his passing, my existing clients had no idea of my absence. And they kept saying, like, we don't understand. How could you have been away? They just didn't know. And so we were very positive in nature. It was a private matter. It was just not something we talked a lot about. And then they started to ask me, if I could help, if I could do that, if I could be away and they didn't know, then maybe I could help them get to their kids' soccer games and things like that. So I started working with them under that capacity. And I started realizing that a lot of people, were in business that looked good on paper, and they're online, they're doing all the right things. And they've been in business like 5-10 years, but they're still working way too many hours for this point of their journey. And so that's when I also realized these people were very isolated. So I wrote the book, and then we start with the winner's circle, and one thing led to another. And that's how it all unfolded.
You had an obviously unfortunate tragedy in your life, but you took that setback as an opportunity for you to advance yourself and then help other people along the way.
Well, that's very generous of you. I don't even know if I took it as an opportunity. It was just, I did want to help other people. And I was very thankful for my situation. I mean, the grounds of that, if I had come back to that business and it had dissolved, that was not the time for me to be whipping up a resume, looking for a job, trying to be charming in a job interview, and then learn something new. So I was ever so thankful that that was something I could go back to. And since you're someone that really appreciates systems and processes, I'll lean right into this. Something I don't even share very often is when I came back. Now we have what my clients call systems and processes on steroids. They're called super toolkits, right? And there's a whole concept and philosophy that make them even more efficient than regular systems and processes. Because often systems and processes, what gives us a bad name is we've all had experience from that as an employee. And those are not written by the end user. They're static in nature, and they're really just there to cover liability. So our super toolkits are a whole different breed. And when I came back to work, and I was thrilled to do that because, the days were long and the weekends were painfully quiet. I was used to having a very large family life and doing all kinds of things with my buddy, my husband, all this stuff. I was following my own super toolkits, my own systems and processes, like I was in some movie where, you've got amnesia and your future self is leaving you clues to save yourself, kind of some adventure. Like grief, I hope most of you have not experienced grief like this, but you could find your keys in your shoe or, a boot in the microwave. Like your brain just doesn't have the stickability that it had before, right? And so I was following these systems and processes like it was a new job for me, but I wasn't making mistakes, and it allowed me to come into work. And it really was a game changer and just saved me, a lot of painful, long, empty days. So aside from I needed something to do and I needed to get back into the game, I couldn't have done that without this being set up properly.
And so from that, you obviously recognized that if it was beneficial to you in your time of grief, that it was beneficial to other people, not just in their time of grief, but for everyday operations. And there's so much conversation in the world about what people call work-life balance, and getting home and getting off of work and onto your life. We have a term for it. We call it work-life integration. We think, my partner Pritch and I, we don't think that there's such thing as balance in work life, but they go together and they integrate together. And sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, depending on what's necessary. But none of us want to be 99% work, 1% life, obviously, or the other way around. You can't completely ignore your business to just be focused on life. So how did this translate for you, again, from it was working for you, that you think you could share this, and whether it was putting it in the format of a book or a website or a podcast, et cetera, so that other people could utilize it and benefit their lives the way you did through this grief process?
Yeah, so I agree with you. The balance, there's never going to be a balance because we do always work more than we are at home, even if you have a luxury lifestyle of like 30 hours a week. And I do believe very much in what I call school hours. You should get long summers, take occasional Friday off. Like, so I'm really, like short hours. I believe that your business should support your life, not consume it. And for most people, they have that backwards, right? So that's hugely powerful. And a lot of these things I had in play that I was told before all this happened. People used to tell me all the time, I run my small business like a big business, that it was very efficient. And I kind of just didn't know what that meant and didn't know, never had to sort of lean into it. So that's hugely important. And I really think what we talk about is the three pillars: your team, your time, and your toolkits, right? So there are things that most of the people, I'd say 90% of the people, don't know how to use their calendar correctly. That's a big one. I would say, as you talk about systems and processes, a lot of people don't understand. I hear every business thinks that they're special or unique. And no, we can't use systems and processes, my business, because, and, I'll tell you a quick story. Barry Gordy from Motown, where they've had like 110 top hits, and all the people from Stevie Wonder to the Supremes and everything. I remember watching a very fascinating documentary on him where he talked about he learned from working in the Ford manufacturing in Detroit. Like, a car went around and there was a framework of the car, and then it went out a complete car. And he said, I thought I could do that with people. And everyone's like, you can't do that with people. And he's like, yes, I can. So he had, he had the systems and process that all the talent would go through. Here's the producing, here's the writers, here's the etiquette, here's where we teach them to dance. They put them through a process. All these hits that people think that they naturally came through, they would vote and decide who got that next hit song. It wasn't just that, oh, the Supremes are good. That was all laid out like a manufacturing process. And he's very clear on that. So the time, the toolkits, and then the team. And I call it your win team, your what is next team, so that you can get to what is next and what is next, right? And so for me, I always jokingly say, if you don't have a team, you really are a sufferpreneur. And to me, a team is I'm like, a big team to me is between 3 and 5 people, right? So with the things that we do with the super toolkits, one of the things that working with your team is it always allows you and your team to compress time and move on to the next thing. Because there is always the next thing. That's what being an entrepreneur is about getting your ideas to execution and doing that next thing. Because otherwise it's just a job and you're doing the same work. And I don't know about you, Kyle, but I know when I wrote my book, I was sure that after I wrote that book, I would want for nothing ever again. Then I'm like,
People,
if I get this.
They do make it think that way. Like when people want you to commit to a book, they make you think that solves everything. Because I'm right there too. I'm about to write one. And I keep getting that same piece of advice. And I keep thinking that can't be realistic.
It's not that I thought it would solve everything. I just thought if I ever got this book out, when you're a child and you want something for your parents, I will never ask for anything again if I get this. And so I thought, if this book gets out, because it just seemed like never ending, I was like, I promise I will never ask for anything again. Cut to then, a year later, it's the podcast. Okay, once I get the podcast out, our podcast is anything from sales to social media. It's very general. But it's like, oh, launching that. Well, once I get that, so there's always another thing. And so that's why you want to have a what is next.
So we work a lot with startups, and we work with businesses who are going through something. They need to transition or change or grow. Maybe it's because sales are declined or their market or their competition has changed. So for startups, one of their biggest hurdles is building a team. Like,
Okay.
how does a startup, what would you recommend for someone who's in startup mode, whether they're still in idea phase or MVP phase, or they're new into the market? How do they start building a team so that original entrepreneur who came up with that idea can actually develop out a fully functioning business without killing themselves 24 hours a day?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so often what happens, people will say to me, Kris, when should you start a team? And I'm like, listen, the best day is day one. The second best day is today, right? And it's really like anytime you want to get anything from idea into action much quicker. You don't want any delays. You want to get to there and you want to move on to the next thing. Because as we move on to these things, it just brings in revenue. It's what I call the 3 Ds: damaging overhead, delayed income, diminished opportunity. Damaging overhead is you. So if you could sell your product or service, let's keep the math simple because I'm horrible at math. If you could sell your product or service for $100 and you're doing all the admin work and you're busy with all that foolishness, then you're not bringing in that $100. So in fact, you're billing your own company that $100, maybe even $100 per hour, because depending on how many you could have brought in, right? So that's a damaging overhead. You are the most expensive damaging overhead in your business. We often think, especially as a new business, I'm saving money doing this myself. It's not even about sleep, Kyle. It's about, oh, I think I'm saving money. How many times I thought I was saving money, do it myself. Oh, I'll learn how to do that. That will only take X amount of hours and delay this and delay that. And, never mind that I get diminishing results because I'm tired. So damaging overhead, delayed income. What about that client or that service you could have sold in January that you didn't get to June? Like, oh my gosh. And what if that person had referred you to one other person? So damaging overhead, delayed income, and I think the most painful of them all, Kyle, is diminished opportunity. When somebody says, oh, Kyle, I wish I knew you. I didn't know you did this. I just locked in with somebody else last week, right? And the lifetime value of that client. So, you really want to understand how much it's costing you when you don't hire someone. So you do really want to start off with someone, even a basic VA. I mean, the world is a magical place. You can get extremely highly talented people for $5-6 an hour. And while you're building this startup, even if you're using something like Loom and you just do screen capture of what you're doing, okay, this is all new, every day is new, they can turn that into basic systems and processes. So you build on your strength tomorrow. You're not relearning anything. You expedite anything that you're doing, leveraging your output, saving time. It just is endless in what it does for moving things forward for you.
So I see a lot of people sort of on the internet, right? So this is a basic conversation here, but a lot of people saying, to build your business, hire a VA and ship off all these lower tasks to other people. But for me, in my CEO mindset, even working not even with just virtual, but like having interns or having assistants in the office, I have this concept in my head that it's going to take me longer to tell you and take me longer to train you and take me longer to develop the tools you need to be the assistant, whether it's virtual or otherwise. So what are some of the ways that you help people get over that hurdle? Because I could tell you that's my number one hurdle.
So what I would say to you is then you're not set up effectively, right? So here's a quick example. It was what year are we? 2023. So I think so not this Christmas, the Christmas before. I think it was 2021. Whatever. 2 weeks before Christmas, Hazel, who had been with us for a couple of years, she worked on my team, and this was like we're all coming out of lockdown, all this craziness. And she found out, she was given 2 weeks notice that she was now moving from the Philippines to Canada to go to school. She was an international student. She had applied 2 years previous to that, and it just, nothing was happening. And all of a sudden she was given literally like 7 days to change her whole life, right? So now, first off, I'll have to tell you, she didn't want to leave us. She's like, well, can I work part-time? I'm like, I don't think you're going to be able to manage this case. Like, they don't want to leave, right? Secondly, we've got all these super toolkits. It's 2 weeks before Christmas. And I will also add to this story and tell you someone had just reached out to me and asked me to do a speaking gig that somebody else had pulled out of. And it was like a 4-hour thing. So I really had to, focus on that, because even just practicing it once or twice, that's a day, right? So I didn't have much time. It's 2 weeks before Christmas. I hired somebody. We've got this 12-point process. We got like 90% retention rate. I do it for all my clients in the winner circle. No problem. I hire Maura. Hazel hands the super toolkits over to Maura, and Maura just follows the process. Think of it like if you're a carpenter. I'm not going to start a job and they're going to teach me how to be a carpenter, but they're going to give me the specs for the tables and the size of what they sell. So Hazel hands the super toolkits over to Maura. I meet with Maura on January 5th because I've been busy with a speaking gig. Maura is now up to 80% capacity. We're good. So and this happens all the time. Like I had one of my clients in the winner's circle and somebody on her team was pregnant and it was a high risk pregnancy. And so her husband just wanted her to quit being a VA and all this other stuff. And my client was like, oh my gosh. I said, this is a process. It's not a big deal. Like, here we go. We found someone new for her and she was up to 80% capacity in like a week because it's just, here's the instructions. Just like when you plug into your car, I could get into your car and plug in the GPS and say, here's where I want to go. It's a different car. I could be in a different city, but I'll get there just like you would have, right? And so I would say that when you find it's quicker to do it yourself, then you're not set up as effectively as you could be, and that you're still spinning your wheels and wasting time on areas that really probably don't deserve your attention.
Fair assessment. So we've addressed startups. Let's talk about existing businesses. A lot of the businesses we work with, they need to make some changes internally in order to compete better moving forward to 2023, as opposed to they did in 2022 or 2018 or 1950. And we find typically they have the wrong processes and systems in place. And when you start examining that, you understand they usually don't have the right people in place either. And so they need to examine those processes and examine their team. So talk about team building for an existing organization that needs to look at, for my take, they need to look at skills and job descriptions versus Becky and Rick and Larry. and so what is your advice for building the right team, maybe making changes and editing your team, or what are some of the mistakes that people make when it comes to building the right team for an existing business?
Oh, there's so much. So I'll try to touch on a couple points that you brought up. First of all, I would like to just add in with the systems and processes you spoke of that are not effective. Most of the time, another mistake that people make is they also have training in those systems and processes.
Yes,
so by
100%.
So by virtue of that being embedded in there, you're training the people who are using them to go, oh, I already know how to do that. I'll skip that step. I'll skip this step. And so you're teaching people how to skim over the steps, right? So that doesn't work. So that's another problem with systems and processes that are not effective. I would tell you, listen, I've been hiring for my clients and myself for a very long time now. And so we have a couple things we follow, like what I call the PASS formula. And the P in PASS is personality over skill set. I always hire personality over skill set. You cannot train a personality, but you can train a skill set, right? So that's a big deal there. The other thing I would say that most people really don't understand, and I think this is not ever talked about, is about the culture. We all have this mindset that culture begins when you have 50 or 100 or 500 people in your team. And what I would like you to think about is this. Imagine, Kyle, that you're on an ocean liner and there's like 500 people on there and something happens and there's a crisis on the ocean liner. You're going to go, okay, I'm a smart guy. I'm going to gravitate towards the people that look like they got it going on. They're going to figure this out. I'm going to stick with them. So maybe there's only 75 people on that ocean liner that are useful in any capacity. Cut to, if you're in a rowboat with two other people and there's a hole in that rowboat, you better hope that team is solid because you're in a much smaller boat. And so the culture that you set up and the even little things that we call it leadership language, when somebody's new to us or one of our clients, we start on them right away. They get training and we course correct really quickly. Like when they're like, in that example I gave you with Maura and Hazel, we were in a meeting. It was the beginning of January, and she a couple times had ideas but didn't speak up. Or she said, "Excuse me, Kris, I have a question." And I'm like, "Maura, we can't do this every time you have a question." And she said to me later in the debriefing, "Well, Hazel trained me, and you're my boss." A word I never used, but she did. So I didn't want to ask. I'm like, "Listen, you're here because you're smart, and I need you to jump in and say, Kris, what about this? I don't have time every day for you. Excuse me, I have a question. It's okay." So I taught her leadership language. And the people on my team will say, I've never felt more heard, I've never felt more confident because I'm empowering them and I'm saying, look, let's get to it. Let's get to it quickly. There's not a hierarchy here. We are a circle and we really are a team. So I think what you're tapping into, Kyle, is so many people don't address culture with smaller teams.
Absolutely true. And it's a lot of work that we do is people call it corporate culture. We like to think of it as more like workplace culture because people are also intimidated. That word corporate and corporate culture makes people think, oh, I have to have a huge organization
Yeah.
to be interested in corporate culture. But the small organizations can benefit the most and be affected the most. And much like your analogy is, the effect is much more immediate when you're in small teams. And losing a member of a small team or not having the right fit or having conflict in a small team has much more effect and direct effect from top to bottom than the big entities. So I love to stay away from the term corporate culture because people picture corporations. Corporate is this big, I have to have hundreds and millions of dollars in business, when majority of the businesses in the United States are small to medium and employ much less people than that picture of, GM that has 50,000 employees in multiple locations. So I agree completely that culture and the people need to be developed soon and early. And then as your company expands out, as you add to it, it's so much easier to hold on to the original culture that's built and allow new influence from additional people because you want their input, you want their influence as well, so that the culture of your organization 5 and 10 years from now is different, but it's developed by the people here working there, right?
Yeah. And in the bigger companies, there's a lot of wastage. That's just it.
Yeah.
Like the culture, because you didn't start when they're small, there definitely is redundancy. There definitely is wastage, but there's not when you've got a small team and you buy into the culture from day one.
I want to circle back to your Barry Gordy story. I love that story. I'm going to look that up. I'm going to watch that documentary because I come from the music industry. My first 15 years as a professional, which started as a teenager all the way through college and into my late 20s, nearly 30 years old, I worked in the music industry at different levels and then transitioned into marketing as a creative director and on the creative side of marketing before I finally, over the last 15 years, have been more on the strategy and process side. And so many of my creative colleagues hated the idea of process because they thought it would limit their creativity. I find having rules, systems, processes actually takes care of all the small stuff, the minutia, and allows the creative problem solving to happen because you're not focused on any of the small details. You're really focused on big ideas, big pictures, innovation, etc. So I think your example was a pretty good verification that the more systems and processes you have in place, the more creativity you can actually foster in an organization because the small stuff is kind of known and kind of almost on autopilot.
Well, what happens is people talk about time management. I really believe in energy management. You should leave the workday fresh and start refreshed. And so what happens is you get decision fatigue, you get attention residue, all that stuff wears down your battery. So when you're remembering little things, I mean, the brain is not a hard drive. It's supposed to create ideas, not store them, right? So all these little nuances and noises when you remember, oh, right, yeah, there's 7 steps. Oh, wait, now hold on. And if there's 7 steps to anything, you will not remember all 7, and the ones you miss will rotate. So you burn out a lot of battery doing things like that. And so if you follow systems and processes, and even if you say, let's say you're somebody that writes content for websites, and it's like, okay, here's the step on what we do every time, the things we check for when we do our research. Here's the 4 things we check for in our first draft. Then you have more brain power and the bandwidth for that creativity and more freedom. And you can do something at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that somebody else would be like, oh, I'm fried. I'll have to come in early to do this, right? So
Yeah.
it really frees you completely.
I agree. And so I want people to understand that point emphatically. I love the story you told. I wanted to get into more of your approach, but I wanted to come back and reemphasize that because my background being in creative, I run into this all the time. I also want to give a huge shout out to Kris, y'all. I get 10 or 20 requests a day to be on the podcast. I get cold emails, I get DMs on Instagram and LinkedIn, etc. Kris had probably one of the best approaches. That's why she's on the show today. Not only did she message me, not a cold message, a warm message. She had done some research. She had some, and not again in a form letter, but made me feel like Kris was paying attention to the Golden Group content and to the Strategic Growth podcast. But then the moment she knew she had a live person paying attention, followed up immediately with a great video, not a text, not a message, a video, and literally had my name on the screen to make sure she understood she was talking directly to me. And again, it wasn't some generic thing you pulled out of your toolbox in order to get your opportunity on the podcast. So I say no 99% of the time. The 1% I said yes today was because Kris had a very human and a very hustler and a very entrepreneurial approach to making a connection for all the right reasons and creating a good conversation we could have today, as opposed to a lot of people out in the world who just simply want to be self-promotional. And typically what's happening is they've hired someone else to do that. And that's why it comes off as cold and stilted and uniform, because they're sending out 1,000 of those a day. So kudos to you for being the human in the process and the tenacity that you had to put it all together.
Well, you bring up some really good points, and thank you very much for that compliment. Flattery will get you everywhere with me. And but what I want to add is, because I have the team in place, because I have the systems and processes, then I can put time into reaching out to people like you. And also, I don't know if you noticed, but in the video behind me, you had your podcast on the screen behind me. So I held up your name, and then I wanted you to recognize your face and your name. And I can do those things because I have time to do those things. So I'm not sending out form letters. I'm saying, listen, I've listened to your show. Here's what I think. I think we'd have a good time. And I think this is what we could do, and blah, blah, blah. But I had the time because all the other noise is not only eliminated, but we believe in what we call the win formula. You should be at 60%, admin work, 40% execution. And most people are like at 90, right? So we're always looking to compress that. But that's how I have time to do the important work, like reach out to someone like you when I want to be heard and do it well and put some thought and effort into it because of the bandwidth I have in my calendar.
So with that being said, now is the time to be self-promotional. Tell everyone about your book, your podcast, your website, etc. Because I'm thinking a lot of people have heard our conversation today. They're interested. They want to know more. We want to teach them more. We want them to get the information. So tell them how to find it.
Yeah. So, tell me, reach out on any of the socials and tell me you heard me on this fantastic show, and we'll be fast friends. I do have something special for your audience at gift, G-I-F-T from Kris, KRIS.com, free gift from Kris.com. There's something very special there that we're not keeping very long, free audio version of my book. So you might want to grab that. And there's a really interesting Scale Your Business scorecard that gives you instant and actionable results immediately within 2 minutes. It's really fun, takes whatever, it's really short. So you can check me out there. And check out our podcast. It's anything from sales to social media, just general business, but we do have a lot of fun. And I'm just thrilled you trusted me with your audience, Kyle. So I think this was fantastic.
You got to love when it comes all together like that. I guess today has been Kris Ward. Win the hour, win the day. The links will be in the show notes, of course, about how to find her. Obviously, tons of energy, tons of authenticity. She's putting this to work for her, so might be beneficial to you as well. Thank you for being on the podcast today, Kris.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Golden Group Strategic Growth Podcast. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode. Follow the Golden Group on social media. For more information, past episodes, or to contact us, please visit thegoldengroup.com.